Hey Gators, it's Dr. Jensen, and I wanted to bring to you more information about organizational change and personal change management. So kind of going along with the theme of our module, we have lessons on leadership and getting a little bit of mentoring and coaching on good interview questions to determine fit, but I felt like we needed to kind of do some overall preparation as we enter the workforce of things that happen once you get the job and kind of strategies on how to move forward when you're presented with change. So first, we're going to talk about personal change management. So personal change management is really about kind of looking at your own obstacles, okay, your own resistance or your own hesitations to change. So I tell people, I encourage you to create a list, a file or a box or a note on your phone or in a document where you keep all of your ideas for change. My list was entitled, All the Things I'm Going to Do Once I Have Blank. So if you're looking to put a change in your life, sometimes it's our to-do list, right? Or things that you think would be better or improved or more efficient, more effective. I really was only able to do these things effectively because I was established in my career and I could invest time in making the long-term changes that I thought were necessary. So I don't want you to get stuck in that saying, hey, I haven't even gotten a job yet, or the job I want, I'm still waiting to hear back, or, I'm not at this place yet. It's not too early to start thinking about the changes that you want to make in your own life that are going to be complementary to your career and also to your lifestyle. So don't feel like you have to be completely comfortable. Obviously, that is a place of luxury to have things set and to be comfortable, but it's still important to use this as an opportunity to kind of get things arranged and do a little bit of preliminary planning. So think of your career in strategic and long-term ways. Just because you're not in a stable career right now or your final destination doesn't mean you can't make the list to think about what you want to be doing. So let's pause for a moment and say, what ultimately are your goals? For some of you, you may want to be in some kind of supervisory or managerial role, and you may not be in that role right now. You would like to be a director or a leader or a vice president of something someday. Maybe for others, you want to own your own business and be your own boss. Others say, no, I just really want to be a part of a dynamic team. I really want to work with clients, with people in need. Maybe some of you want to be an inventor. You want to create things or try things and explore because you're very curious. So these are the kinds of things we're talking about as far as personal changes. What are the kinds of things you'll have to do that are manageable on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that can move you toward those things you're seeking? That's what we're talking about. So in the beginning, you can't do everything now, but you can focus your energy today on whatever it is that will allow you the stability, respect, and reputation in the future to achieve a larger set of goals. So it might be that you need to pay homage to your curiosity on a regular basis to kind of keep that inventor goal alive. Or it might mean that you assume responsibility in some small way, whether it's for yourself or something in your life or your own routine, to develop your managerial skills. Again, it can be super simple like that. So here are kind of some pieces of advice to help you tackling your own personal changes and commitments. So first, limit overcommitment and learn to say no. There are plenty of articles out there from all different kinds of organizations that say this is so important. And we tend to assume more things than we can actually handle, again, because of our desire to please, because of our desire to be promoted, to be noticed, to be recognized, and to demonstrate our work ethic. It doesn't mean it should be done, right? It doesn't mean it's the wisest course of action. So we have to use priority and we have to use communication to help people understand when our plate is too full. And you can do that in a way that doesn't create uncertainty in the mind of your supervisor. You can help them understand your commitment to quality and to a job well done without burning yourself out, because that's what we're ultimately trying to prevent is burnout. And you certainly can't make change happen in your life if you're in survival mode or crisis mode and constantly battling your to-do list and all the burdens and responsibilities you have in a moment-to-moment basis. you can't make long-term progress when you're just trying to keep your head above the water. So that means you have to do a little bit of pushing back. Sometimes we talk about working at your to-do list from a perspective of either do it yourself, don't do it, hire it out, or dismiss it, right? So you got to kind of think of if it needs to get done, it needs to be handled. Does it need to be handled by you? Maybe not. Or we think about, does it need to happen now? What urgency is here? Or can this happen later? Now, of course, we all procrastinate and can be lazy at times. So this is where you have to pay attention to your own personal goals and make sure they're lining up to your deadlines. For those of you reading this and who are already overcommitted, list your current commitments on a piece of paper. Ask yourself, what initiative, committee, or project can I work on in a limited capacity that will fulfill my desire to make change with a minimal time investment? So is there something you can at least participate in or involve yourself in that's not going to burn you out and preoccupy you incredibly? So sometimes we have to think about the way we take on work or the way we participate that might make all the difference. And one final note, you need to honestly review that list and be very genuine about it and ask yourself these kinds of questions. Does this make sense for me at this time in my career? Is this how I should be spending my time? Is this work I'm currently doing precluding me from progress on my goals? How many hours am I spending each week on this work versus what I should be doing? And sometimes doing some time mapping, actually listing what you're doing every day and actually taking a good, honest look at that can be very revealing. And then also, is it worth it? Will I be here to see this change? Should I really be committed to it? And some people say, yeah, because it's part of the greater good. I want to leave a legacy, and that's fine, but that has to reconcile with your values. For others, that is not going to be the motivation they need to see it through. So again, being honest with yourself matters. Finally, is my commitment to my current organization equal to my organization's commitment to me? So this has to do with investment. You think about, I'm putting all my time and energy into this. Is my return on investment there? I mean, am I really giving my company or my organization a great bargain because I'm just willing to push myself into oblivion to get things done? Am I being compensated fairly? So again, this kind of list, when you think about personal change, when you think about your career in strategic and long-term ways, this is what gives you the kind of high octane view to say, hey, maybe it's time I ask for a promotion. Maybe I need to see other people in my same industry or in my same career and see if I'm doing equitable work and for an equitable salary. Now, of course, when we're in difficult economic times, many times we're just grateful to have a job. But you also don't want to be cheated or treated unfairly. And you also want to think about timing. So if your organization's hurting right now because of difficult economic times, then it might not be the best time to ask for that promotion. But at the same time, this is work that you can do when the time becomes more appropriate. And it also helps you prevent your own burnout and maintain your relationships so that you don't kind of grow cynical and kind of, just overwhelmed. And it can sour beyond your work life, right? It can bleed over into your personal life. So these are some things just to consider for personal change management. We're going to change gears into organizational change. So beyond ourselves, let's talk about some of the principles of organizational change. This is a little bit of a longer presentation, so you may want to do this in chunks. Normally, my presentations are between 8 and 14 minutes. This one is going to be a little bit longer, so if you'd like to pause the lecture now and take a breather, you can, and then kind of continue at a later time. That's perfectly fine. So, organizational change. What is it? What it is, it's a modification or transformation of the structure, process, or products and services offered, which impacts the way work is performed and has significant effects on staff. So it's some major thing that happens at your place of work that changes work as you know it. But it can be all kinds of things. So let's talk about some examples. So a few examples include maybe new departments or split departments or even dissolved departments that go away. Expansions or layoffs for the workforce. Getting new employees, losing employees. New operations and functions, taking on new territory, new responsibilities. different working hours or practices, the way we document our work, or paperwork is one that happens. Procedure, right? Changes in how roles are carried out, new leadership, or a different environment, setting, or location where the work is performed. So these are some things that I can imagine many of you have experienced in past jobs or even in your current job. And it can certainly be stressful. So some changes that are planned, we call those deliberate changes, right? But then others can be quite unexpected. Those are more emergency changes, and they do happen in the life course of an organization. So some organizations evolve and adapt to changing times and demands and can make plans for this. They're very proactive. However, other organizations have changes imposed upon them. They're unforeseen due to adverse events and or laws. Or things like lawsuits, right? Or things totally out of people's control, like pandemics. Examples will include things like new inventions, new technology, market booms or crashes, pandemics, as we mentioned, crises, bankruptcies, market competition, product evolution, planned obsolescence, right? Especially with things like cell phones. There's a new cell phone coming out 2 to 3 times a year now with new features. So you kind of have to think about whether that new feature is needed, and should I get rid of my old cell phone? We see the same in cars with new features all the time as well. Cars, clothing, furniture, cell phones, especially technology, and even in film and in the entertainment industry, where things that were entertaining a long time ago really aren't so much now because we have this insatiable desire to be amused. Technological innovation is another thing that happens. Outsourcing, definitely. Downsizing, globalization or global forces, political and legal changes, lawsuits, a changing workforce. We see that actually in the public sector. More and more employees are quite a bit older. I remember reading a statistic that the average age of employees in the public sector is 51. It's very rare that you see employees under the age of 30 in that sector. And if all of those employees are retiring all at the same time and they're an older workforce, that creates problems for the organization to replace those workers with a lot of institutional knowledge going out the door. So again, changing workforce stuff can happen very easily. And you can also have similar problems with a young workforce. If the entire workforce is young and occasionally inexperienced, sometimes that creates problems for the organization as well, that they don't have the expertise quite yet to be competent in the work or industry dominant. We also have things like turnover, right? You have a leader that leaves, or a department head, or a trainer that's gone. Sometimes that creates big changes. Declining effectiveness. You have supply limitations, or even changing employee expectations of how they expect to be treated at work, or the kind of benefits or salaries they feel are reasonable, and things like that. So what we do is we tackle these organizational changes with an area called organizational development. Really large firms, organizations, and institutions have a whole department dedicated to this. Or they will call in a consulting firm that does these functions for them. Smaller organizations and nonprofits don't usually have these, but they need to use these principles in order to successfully implement the organizational changes necessary. So organizational development is essentially a planned approach to improve effectiveness by intervention in the processes and structures that impact employees. So they can be all kinds of things. Sensitivity training, we call it change management, new methodologies, new processes, being very good listeners, being very analytical, providing reassurance and supports to the change as it is implemented. Professionals that work in OD, or organizational development, are called change agents, and they are often external consultants that bring objectivity to the situation in order to collaborate through mutual trust, improvement, and jointly determined goals. So that way they don't come in with an emotional attachment to the situation, and they can kind of remain objective and kind of impartial. So that way you don't get quite as attached and involved to the company. So these are where the consultants come from. Basically, a change agent is really a person who has the skill and authority to stimulate, facilitate, and coordinate the change effort by providing training, revealing implications, driving new skill sets, and orient forward thinking for anticipated problem solving. So they're really the method by which the madness happens. This person also provides data and research to drive the change. They evaluate success efforts, and they create action plans for implementation. So again, a highly analytical person works in OD. So a strong change agent requires skills in empathy, understanding linkages like ties and collaborations, analyzing proximity, the closeness of the change. We call it open door policy, where we think about how much of an impact a change has on a person or unit. We also have to have skills in trust or developing trust, high visibility, thinking within structures, being responsive, employing incentives and reinforcers or rewards for the change occurring. There's a lot of different kinds of change agents out there. Some are more positive, others are more negative. But essentially, we have 4 types that we're going to talk about. So the first type is people change technology type. So basically, the focus is paid to the individual and concern is on staff morale. Absenteeism, turnover, and work quality. So they will often employ job enrichment, goal setting, and behavior modification to achieve the goal. So the focus is really the human capital is most important. And we fear that people will push back in all kinds of ways. So we need to kind of pay lip service to the people and make sure that they are satisfied and fulfilled in the work. So that's where the focus is. You have another one that's kind of seen a little more negatively, outside pressure types. So this is changing from the outside as a non-organizational member, using tactics like mass demonstrations, civil disobedience, and even sometimes violence to achieve the goal. Sometimes you see this with strikes or unions, but this can also be a sort of change agent from the outside in. Then you have analysis for the top types. So they change the structure to improve output and efficiency, but they pay attention to the process within operations research, systems analysis, policy studies, and other analytical approaches to achieve the goal. So they're not so people-focused, they're more process-focused. They're going to be looking at market research, market competition, the law, and really kind of looking at the whole unit as a system rather than a population of people. And then finally, the organizational development type, again, which is the most common approach. It focuses on internal processes like intergroup relations, communication, and decision-making, especially when that decision-making can be decentralized. And if you give people a chance to have some say, we call it voice and choice. With decision-making, it really does help create buy-in and rally support. They often do their intervening with a strategy called cultural change approaches, analyzing the organization's culture. So every job that you get is landed within a culture as far as behaviors that are acceptable and unacceptable in that workplace, and also the workplace values that are valued, how they see the world working, and the way they celebrate, the way they recognize. That's their organizational culture. And that is what an organizational developer is going to focus on, to say, okay, how do we make this fit and harmonize with that culture? So let's talk about the process of change. So essentially, there are several steps. First, you do an unfreezing. Okay, so you're reducing the internal or external forces to maintain operations or a status quo. So essentially, you're trying to limit the disruptions going on. Okay, and trying to make sure that people are comfortable as they're starting to prepare for a change to happen. The next step is implementing the change, and this involves developing new attitudes, acceptance, and behavior around the change they are experiencing. And then finally, you have a refreezing, where those new attitudes and behaviors are reinforced. And basically, you're getting the change some permanency. Okay, this is the new way of doing business, and this is how we're moving forward. So you kind of do your essential preparation, your implementation, and then your reinforcement is another way to think about it. Of course, you will have resistance to change, right? People will provide you individual resistance, and certainly there will be organizational resistance as well. And so let's talk about both in just a moment. First, individual resistance. It resides in basic human characteristics of perception, uncertainty, insecurity, fear, needs, competition, and threat. So we all have experienced those things in our society. So reasons that an individual might resist a change include a fear of unemployment, fear of demotion, losing status, reductions in pay or lifestyle, a change in work hours, a loss of job security, loss of coworker relationships. They like the unit they're working, and if you move them to another unit, they're going to have less access to people they care about and enjoy being with. Reduced status, skill devaluation, that you won't think what I'm doing is important anymore. Disturbance to existing comforts or routines. Now I have to commute over here rather than over here. I lost my parking space. You'd be surprised at how much this bothers people. They're pressured by a group. So they may not have complete individual resistance, but they kind of subscribe to the group pressure, saying, well, what's good for the group must be good for me. They're feeling uncertain or unsafe, or they feel socially displaced, where they kind of have confusion about where they fit and what their role is. On the other side, we also have organizational resistance. So this resides in things like resource constraints, financial limitations, shortage of materials, market stressors, and worker shortfalls. So these are kind of at a higher level, more of a macro level. And some of these reasons include things that we call structural inertia, right? Built-in mechanisms of resistance, things like unions, where certain changes have to go through a system of review before they're implemented. We also have things like that we call sunken costs. So these are investments in fixed assets that become devalued or lost. So let's say your organization just purchased a new building for all the employees to work, and suddenly a new change happens, or the bursting of the bubble occurs, and we can't all move into that new building now. We actually have to sell it. So we've actually lost some money, or that building is not as valuable as it used to be because now we have to make a change. This can also be things like equipment. It can be products. It can be vehicles, all kinds of stuff, right? So sunken costs are a really big deal. Then certainly you have bureaucracy, right? So there just are kind of built-in mechanisms of resistance and filters that have to be gone through. You'll see that sometimes in unions. Strong authority roles, right? So sometimes the way leadership occurs is top-down leadership or chain of command leadership, and that can be some organizational resistance that happens as well. Sometimes it's a loss of power or influence from one unit to another. And I call it self-determination, which sounds more like an individual resistance reason, but what we're getting at here is the ability of the organization to see its own destiny and determine its own course and life cycle. So if they lose a sense of that self-determination, you have bigger problems on your hand, right? They feel like the tail is wagging the dog and they're not in control of themselves. You also have things like threatened expertise and specialization. Again, this goes with devaluing, but it's kind of more at a group level. And then you have politics and power shifts, and certainly things like group advantage or disadvantage. Well, those guys are getting this and now we're not. And a lot of comparisons happens at that time. So as far as managing resistance to change, whether it's individual or organizational, we have to talk about a few things. The strategies include education about risks or benefits. So just kind of being upfront with people. Hey, a change is coming and this is how it's going to go down. We can also do more communication and detail so people can adequately prepare, whether it's prepare physically, mentally, or emotionally, or socially with relationships that may change. Engaging participation and empowerment, relating to the ideas that people have, the fears, the discomforts. Do shared decision making, making people feel like they have a say, again, buys you support and clout as if you're going to bat for them. And then certainly providing empathy and support. And the recommendation here is to use active listening and reinforce to a person that they are heard and that your actions and responses reinforce that. And this can really improve the change process is active listening. That's a big one. And then finally, negotiation. Be willing to maybe change your process or your implementation a little bit because new information comes your way that maybe is a game changer that you had not considered before. It can save you a lot of headaches down the road and prevent future problems from coming up. It also is a way, again, to garner support and buy-in from the unit or group of people that are experiencing the most drastic changes. How to unmanage resistance to change. Kind of the saying here is manage the change or it will manage you. It's kind of happening with lots of forces, whether we like it or not. And you will get much bigger problems if it is not closely managed. Also, manipulation occurs sometimes where people lose trust in the people implementing the change and they get a lot of distortion of fact, or they try to make lies attractive and they feel that they did not go in with a true picture of the nature of the changes. And so manipulation occurs and that can very much unmanage the resistance. And then you have other things like co-optation. You're withholding information and you're letting that rumor mill run rampant, which can create lots of problems. Or you can take over responsibilities that you formally delegated to a group and say, well, you're not doing it the way I'd like you to, so I'm just going to do it for you. That's kind of another form of co-optation. And then finally, coercion, where it's just downright threat or force. If you want to keep your job, you're going to do it this way. You kind of have do or die ultimatums applied to you in the form of coercion. Or you feel like you will miss out on a promotion, or you will miss out on pay, or it can be all kinds of different threats going on, or you'll lose your reputation. That's something else that happens. So these are the kind of guardrails that you want to catch early if you see these things going on and you're going through an organizational change. As an employee, you need to bring this to the attention of the change agent immediately and say, hey, there is a perception out there that there's some co-optation going on, or people are feeling a little coerced to go along with the changes, and you might want to keep that on your radar because it can spin out of control. You have to delicately tread on these. Obviously, people can feel that you're criticizing their techniques, you're criticizing their plans. So you have to approach it in a respectful, professional manner and say, these are some observations I have, and I felt like it was important to help you understand something you need to pay attention to. But again, also partnering with them in helping deal with that resistance. So hopefully you found this helpful. And again, if you're finding yourself in the middle of change in your organization, these are some ways to kind of maybe think through it more clearly, or certainly as you develop into a leader for your organization or you're promoted into an area of responsibility. These are things that would become useful to you in your newfound responsibilities as you have to implement changes in your organization. So again, might not be as relevant early on in your job search, but again, for students that are in a position where they're going for a promotion, they're seeking new employment, you will experience these things in a matter of time. So this might be a good presentation to tuck away and refer back to as you come into these kinds of experiences. Hopefully you enjoyed things, and we'll see you next time.